One.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And today is a fascinatingly great day on a number of fronts, and we're going to roll out all of the pleasantries in just a moment. First and foremost, I know a lot of you have been concerned for my health. I recently took another COVID test, and I am negative. As you can see, I got my Best Buy uniform on. I'm ready to go down there and help some customers, whether or not they choose to hire me. And I'm looking forward to that. But let's talk about, speaking of corporate culture and big companies, you know, the devil, as it's called, as it's seen. Coca-Cola has come under fire recently when some of its sensitivity training screenshots emerged, like the kind of stuff they make their employees read through and click, I agree, or basically, sensitivity training stuff. You guys probably know this stuff. You guys probably have jobs and all that, right? You got to learn about what it means to not be sexually inappropriate in the workplace, and obviously not to be racist in the workplace. And it seems like they're getting a little more modern with it. They're getting a little bit more hip. They're hiring kind of the younger generation now to write their little instruction manual. And one of the things that it's basically seems to be saying now is, here's what it means to be white, basically impervious to other people's suffering, like blissfully unaware of historical context and all of the trauma that the non-straight whites have been dealing with, and basically be aware of it. And in the words of this sensitivity training, be less white. That's what you can do to help. Be less white. And this screenshot, this image emerged. I would say went very viral on social media. There's a lot of hype around it. It puts me in a difficult position because I'm glad things like this are exposed and attention called to it, but I also strongly dislike, I think, just about everyone who's making a big deal out of this. So I'm in a tough position. And also, it's so difficult to assess things in the corporate world, divorcing it from the fact that we live in a very regulated society. And also philosophically, morally, very much altruism is still the moral code. Let me explain. So on a moral level, the people at Coca-Cola and every other company, they're being told things by the intellectual forces in the culture that they don't really know how to answer. That's one part of it. And also PR wise, they want to avoid negative publicity. Obviously, Coca-Cola doesn't want to be seen as dragging their feet on the racial equality issue. And also on the positive side, like many companies, they want to be seen as virtuous members of the community. They're not just in it for profit. They care, right? So that's on the sort of moral, practical PR level. And even more practical than that is politically, in an age where it's illegal to be racially discriminatory in the workplace. Coca-Cola really doesn't want anyone to ever sue them saying that, I felt uncomfortable working at Coca-Cola as a partially disabled, sexually, different person of color. That they don't want that. And so for multiple reasons, it just makes sense for Coca-Cola. And on top of all of that, corporations are trying to be cool. They're all doing it now, just like politicians, AOC and all these people, they think they're part of the cool club now. And it becomes uncool whenever politicians and corporations do something. So just don't do it. But Coca-Cola, they're trying to be hip. So for a long list of reasons, it made most sense to them at that time to hire some BuzzFeed editor, some Huffington Post, probably, if I had to guess, white woman to draft this sensitivity training manual for $1,000 a minute that they paid them, so that the employees can roll their eyes and click next and hand it in. And everybody basically got paid for this waste of time. And Coca-Cola can sleep and get through another night without worrying about being racist. That's kind of why this is not that big a deal. But on the flip side, it is as bad as it looks, because we're seeing these ideas coming from universities into places of influence. And it's moving us ever so closer to a world where there might be actual apartheid. There might be actual, and there already is, large doses of guilt being pushed on children, on adults, on everyone, telling them, here's what you need to feel guilty about, and here's your moral standard, and all of these things that just are quite literally deathly. And that is why altruism equals death. So we need a positive alternative, and you'll never guess what it is. But let me introduce you to first to today's scheduled guest. This is somebody who has spoken on the issue of GMOs, genetically modified organisms, aka food that has been perfected by science or made closer to perfect. Talk about companies virtue signaling to let you know they care, they're part of the community. This we don't use GMOs, that label on food, that's a reason not to get the food, I say. They're anti-science. Well, I'm going with the GMO food if I have the opportunity. So she's spoken about that. She's knowledgeable. She's a doctor, actual doctor. I don't think a medical doctor, but
no, I'm not that kind of a doctor. So if you needed that kind of help.
Right. If well, now that I'm COVID free, I feel invincible. But if you're wondering who that is Dr. Amanda Maxham.
Awesome. Thank you for having me here. I watched a Malcolm Gladwell masterclass about like how to speak in front of people. And he said the first thing that you should do is disarm your audience. And so I'm going to try to do that. Like I run a physics and math like emergency help desk. And so I get a lot of calls of people asking me to talk about things I know nothing about. And this is pretty much along those lines, right? So I don't read the news and I don't work at Coca-Cola. I haven't taken it's been a long time since I've taken an HR training course. They're about as Rucka describes. But yeah, on the other hand, I'm happy to talk about anything and give you my insights. So this is cool.
Well, knowing nothing about a topic has never stopped me from doing a podcast episode about it here. And, you don't have to be an expert. You just have to care. And but speaking of preparation, I actually prepared for today's show. People accuse me of never being prepared. I actually Googled something. I Googled who owns Pellegrino. Who owns Pellegrino? Is it Coca-Cola? Because then we might have a bit of a conflict here. Turns out Pellegrino is owned by Nestle. So we are perfectly in the clear to have this co-host on. Please welcome from his vehicle, the man, the myth, actor Mark Pellegrino.
Yay, luckily I have an autonomous vehicle, so it's driving on its own, or at least I'm told it can drive on its own. So I take no responsibility for what's about to happen. And just like you, expertise on something has never stopped me from opening my mouth about it. So,
well, cynical people will look at this episode. They're gonna assess that we're all a bunch of white guys and gals, and they're gonna say, "What do these guys know about this topic?" And I say, let's find out what we know about this topic. So, Mark, were you kind of freaked out by this be less white stuff going on in the workplace, or do you kind of agree? Honestly, like I said, these corporations are trying to be cool. And Amanda, you can answer this too if you have any thoughts. They're trying to be cool, and that's kind of how cool people have been talking for decades. Being white is kind of lame. Be less white. What do you guys think, Mark?
Yeah, but I think whiteness being associated with certain values, ways of thinking, and relative levels of sensitivity isn't the way to approach a problem like sensitivity towards your fellow man. To me, it's not about singling out a particular race and claiming they have a monopoly on insensitivity, because they've formed the structures upon which we look at everything. It's not true. I don't think it's true. I think you can make your point equally well without alienating an entire group of people by saying, hey, be sensitive to folks that you might not normally look at or think about too much. Just be sensitive, because they're there. They like you, have hopes, dreams, and aspirations, and let's include them in the conversation going forward. Let's not claim that it's exclusively a white problem to be insensitive to others. I think that's the kind of debasement and dehumanization of a whole group of people for no reason whatsoever, other than ascribing race to some kind of awful characteristic.
Yeah, Amanda, what do you think?
Well, so with these things, I don't read the news like almost at all. And I find with some of these things, it's really important to go back to the what's the source material, who actually said what. So I was looking at the slides from the news story, where the person who gave the seminar lays out what it means to be less white. And it's an interesting list. Like there's things on here that you don't like. I would agree. I don't want to be like that. And there's things on here that I don't agree with. So it's this strange mix of things. I get she's trying to make a point about what she sees in the world and I suppose trying to make the world better. And that seems like a worthy goal. But the list of things seems mixed in terms of like some of it I would agree with. And all over it's totally wishy-washy. It's like, so the first one says be less oppressive. What do you mean less oppressive? How about just don't oppress people? Like, it seems like that's a better way to put it. Be less arrogant.
But you have to be oppressive because you are white. You're part of the superstructure of whiteness that imposes its will on everybody. The way you think, the way you look, the way you talk, everything about you is oppressive because you are white. It's the conflation of all of these terrible things that I think most white people would agree are awful with whiteness. And I think it's not only superficial and awful, it's murderous. It's the beginning of a deep dehumanization of people for their skin tone. Not the beginning. I mean, we've been doing that since the beginning of time, but it's a deliberate dehumanization of people based on skin color. You're not oppressed. And it's not that the only thing in your capacity is to oppress people less, because just by nature just by the fact that virtue of the fact that you're white, you're going to be oppressive. I mean, it's a bad faith statement from the get-go, don't you think?
I think so. It at least doesn't really tell me much. Like, again, be less oppressive. It doesn't seem like she's even coming out with an opinion here about what I should or shouldn't do. It's just be less of something. And
right.
If she's assuming that I can't help it, that's not good. But.
That's it. She's presuming you can't help it because you're white.
So you can't help it, but try at least, get A for effort, kind of like us being unprepared for the topic. You get an A for effort. Now, Amanda, you did a podcast a few years back called Rise and Fall, right? And it was about how the sort of parallel journey of philosophy as well as just sort of incidental history, and kind of showing how ideas have helped history be maneuvered in certain directions, if I understood the premise of the podcast. The way that I kind of interpret things like this is that, the woke folks, they're always saying, when you say this word, it's really code for that word. So like, you're racist, no matter what you say, it's really code for something racist. But I flip it and I say, when you say white, you really mean Western, by which you mean capitalist, Enlightenment influenced reason and individualism, which is why when you look at the woke vocabulary, you're actually seeing professors teaching that individualism is code for white supremacy. So they are actually packaging the two together and saying anyone who tells you that Western civilization is something worth saving and living in is a white supremacist, whether they know it or not, whether they are white or not. West, which is, again, capitalism, individualism, and traces of egoism. Anyone who is pushing that on you, they say, is actually just pushing for white supremacy.
Yeah, there's definitely lots of that going on, where people try to get you to use words, if I understand your point, words in a way that makes it where you assume their thoughts and their beliefs just by using the word, because it's become the word now holds things in the concept that you may not be aware of, or that they put there on purpose for you to propagate forward. So that's that definitely happens. I do think, though, that this idea of being like, whether or not you're white or what that means, there probably is something to what she's saying, that there's that, I don't know. I did like literally 5 minutes of prep for this, so this is good. So I read a Malcolm X speech where he talks about this, and um, he says that, I mean, he makes this point about when he sees people calling themselves white in Asia or the Arab world or Africa, they're just like literally referring to their physical characteristics. But he says, I'll quote it just a little bit here. He says, but when you get the white man over here in America and he says he's white, he means something else. You can listen to the sound of his voice. When he says he's white, he means he's boss. That's right. That's what white means in the language. You know the expression free white in 21? He made that up, letting you know that white means free boss. He's up there so that when he says he's white, he has a little different sound in his voice. I know you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so he's saying that there's something to this idea that if some people do use that or think of themselves in a way that packages together their physical characteristics with how they interact with the world and how they view themselves as superior for simply being for their physical characteristics, which is definitely racism. So I think there's something to this, but how she's coming at it and how she's trying to fight against that, or whether she's actually trying to fight against that, I don't know. It seems, like I said, kind of a mixed message. And besides, isn't Coca-Cola, isn't their whole thing like to give the world a Coke?
That is their thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely wanted to get to kind of like the elements of truth in what this woke doctrine is saying, because there often is a kernel of truth that is packaged along with a lot of falsehood. And it certainly is true that probably a lot of times people feel shut off. They feel like they're not being given an objective, a chance by people, that assumptions are made about them. But oftentimes the attempts to remedy the problem only make it worse. I think the best thing for everyone is a culture of assimilation, that America is the place where people from all various backgrounds can come to, and you're in. That's it. Get a piece of it, get a piece of the pie, or bake your own pie, as I think Euron would rather we put it. That's kind of how I think is the best way to solve problems like this, feelings of alienation, rather than emphasizing how different somebody feels in a certain environment and calling attention to it. One question I have is this good for Coca-Cola's working environment? Like, do they actually see this as a good way to increase productivity and morale, or is it entirely about kind of appeasing the outside world? That's something I don't really know. Mark is muted.
I don't think they're appeasing. Thank you. I don't think they're appeasing the outside world. I think they're appeasing a very loud fringe group of people that have more or less dominance in the culture and are determining what aspects of the language are good and bad, what aspects of the culture are good and bad. And the more you give in to those people making these kinds of demands, the more demands they make, the more powerful they become. The grain of truth to me is, yes, we had a culture that was predominantly racist, but also grew up alongside of an Enlightenment culture, and that was liberal. And that liberalism, since it has reality on its side, science, reality, reason, logic, liberty, independence, individualism, it overtook these parochial aspects of our society, and these collectivist, parochial, primitivist versions of our society. And I have no doubt that Malcolm X experienced that very thing in the world when he was coming up in it. But the concomitant growth of liberalism, or the expansion of liberalism, it was a repudiation of that way of looking at people and identifying people. And to me, liberalism is predominantly about not only just marginalizing violence in society. It's about unshackling us from non-essential identification. And so we're constantly essentializing our concept of what a person is, and that essentialization also makes the definitions that we come up with more universal. And so we were losing color as a standard of character. We were in the midst of losing that. Yes, it took hundreds of years I mean, if you're talking from the beginning of civilization, 10,000 years, almost 20,000 years of trial and error and struggle before we got to the point of losing that element in determining a person's character and honing it into this concept of the rational identity, the reasoning individual. And now we're going backwards. It's the critical race theorists have embraced that identity. They're not rejecting it because they're rejecting liberalism as well and embracing ethnic identity and trying to throw it back in everybody's face as a pivot point of pride and use it as a means of leveraging power, which is what they're trying to do now. And all Coca-Cola is doing is appeasing those people who, in my perspective, are psychopathic. I mean, I think the leaders of those communities, the intellectual guardians of this craziness, are psychopathic. And the people following them are either too scared to stand up to them or trying to do good. But, you know, these are the voices that are the standard bearers for good at the moment. So they're just getting behind them because there's no one stronger.
Is it all crazy people though? I mean, when you hear testimonials of people saying like, you know, as a Black person, as an Asian, as a woman in the workplace, I tend to feel shut off. And like, there's a certain chip on my shoulder that I kind of bring with me, the way people look at me, the way they treat me differently. Like, are those all the crazies? I mean, there is an element of truth. Go ahead.
No, and the crazies are the intellectual leaders. The crazies are the people who are asserting a psychopathology on the rest of us and trying to get us to violate the laws of identity, to claim untruths as if they're truth. For example, like race is an essential quality or it contributes to anything to anybody's character. That is an untruth they're trying to make us take as a truth claim. That encourages psychopathy. That just encourages it. But the people who are following it, yeah, they have true narratives. They have real stories, individual contact with people that leads them to believe that we live in a society that's very flawed and fucked up, and people within it are very flawed and fucked up. Should that be generalized into a systemized way of looking at the world? Is this the way it is systemically? I don't think so, not in the manner that they're talking about. And to look at it from their epistemological framework, I think is extremely unhealthy. And the people in the heads of it, the people who are writing these papers, they're the ones who are pathological for this. Not the people who are following along. I think many people are following along. This is the loudest, most strident moral voice in the room. And they're following that because there's no other alternative. There's no other rational alternative. And there's enough grains of truth in what these psychopaths are saying that you can say, well, it's true enough. So I'll say yes.
Well, my point is not to disagree with what you're saying about kind of the influence that intellectuals are having on the world, but I'm saying along with that, isn't there arguably an element of truth to a lot of this that a lot of people would say they feel like they're judged a certain way, that they feel left out in certain respects, that you know, you said, you know, like I don't remember exactly how you put this, but kind of like, don't make like, okay, race is not an essential part of who you are, which I agree. And I hope to see intellectuals embrace that fact. But I think, you know, certain people would say, you know, when Dave Chappelle did his stand-up special after the George Floyd killing, he said in response to Candace Owens, Dave Chappelle said, he says, we didn't make George Floyd a hero. They did, or you did, speaking to the police that killed him. Like they made him a hero, so to speak, right? So somebody might answer you saying, I'm not like, let's say a Black person who disagrees with you might say, I'm not making race an essential part of my identity. You are, by the way you look at me, by the way, you know, maybe not you in particular, but the way society, the way people in Coca-Cola headquarters treat me in the boardroom, etc. So I'm kind of, I'm trying to hint towards there being an element of truth to these complaints.
There is an element of truth. It wouldn't have purchase if there was absolutely no truth to it. It wouldn't get the cultural purchase that it's getting today without an element of truth to it. That's a fact, and I don't deny that at all. But I think they would claim that for me to claim that race isn't an essential aspect of your character is part of the racist structure, that I'm ignoring something which in essence is true. Some people do make presumptions about others based on race. That still doesn't make race an essential systemic issue, essential issue with respect to your development of your character, or a systemic issue. People, I think, judge others according if their distance from the person, their distance from individual knowledge from somebody, they will probably pick up cultural stereotypes in order to inform them with respect to interacting with people. That's unfortunate, but that's a human failing. It's not evidence that racism is systemic. It's evidence that people will tend to react according to stereotypes when they don't have personalized knowledge. Now, we could work on that without calling people whole swaths of individuals racist. We can say, well, let's determine what the character worth of each individual is on his or her own merits in the moment. Let's not just label stereotypical points of view because somebody's far away from any personal knowledge. Let's not label that racist. Let's just label it a human failing that needs to be overcome, and it's overcome by open-mindedness, active-mindedness, rationality, not by walling people off into their subgroups and claiming and making these truth claims.
Yeah. Now, Amanda, you first mentioned that there's probably some truth to what this person is saying. I think was it in the instruction manual that Coca-Cola was doing? Like, there's probably some truth to it, and that's kind of what spawned this, I think. And of course, I turned to Mark, and now we've been flexing and arguing with one another, acting macho. Do you feel, as a woman, like in general and specifically on this podcast, have you been overlooked? Have you been mansplained to? I mean, what is your experience like?
Well, I think I'll just read you from the HR seminar for Coca-Cola. I think you should be less oppressive, be less arrogant, be less certain, be less defensive, be less ignorant, be more humble, listen, believe, break with apathy, and break with white solidarity. I'm kidding. Like, so the thing about this list, or about is that, okay, so say you point out something about the world that is true and is a problem. Okay, and racism is a problem. It does exist. This is not a good guide to help you in any way. It's, first of all, like I said, it's like wishy-washy. It's be more or less of something. And some of the advice is good and others is just dead wrong. Like, be less certain. It's not good advice. Why would you want to be less certain? You want to be more certain of what you know and what you can do and what you can be. And yeah, like, listen and believe what? Like, without, so again, it's hard to know. This is someone's slide deck. I don't know what the words went along with the presentation, but I don't think that there's any sort of consistent message here. It seems like a, relatively low level thinker that's, trying to inspire people, and doing it in a way that's not at all inspirational, not at all useful. If I worked at Coca-Cola, I would put this under the category of noise, just the kind of noise I have to deal with in order to have a job or have a career.
Yeah.
But I think
go ahead.
The consistent message is don't think, don't be certain, listen, don't have an opinion. Your opinion is based on something vile, the thing called white supremacy, and you shouldn't have it. I've had people online tell me this. My job as a white person is to shut up and magnify voices. My job is to be, in other words, they claim I objectify them, though there's not a single one of no human I've ever objectified, but because they've placed me in a category. And what do they do in response? Objectify me. My job is to shut up and be a receptacle, and then a magnifier of certain voices, but certainly not my own. My opinion does not matter. My thoughts do not matter. I have to be a faceless blank, an epistemological blank. And I think that is so freaking destructive. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to just look how they tell you to look and say what they tell you to say, at least they ought to pay you, which luckily it's exactly what they do. So congratulations on that. Everybody else, however, needs to do it for free, according to this doctrine. Guys, we are out of time. The time just flew by. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mark, for being able to make it while you travel. And obviously, thank you, Amanda, for that wonderful guest presence. Hope to have you back soon. We've got,
Thanks, Rucka.
yeah, no problem. And we got super chats. Thank you all for the super chats. You know, just as I see the very pretty female looking name in the chat room, and I'm getting ready to say, oh, thank you, Marcelina. What a nice $ you people have in that country, whatever, right? And I'm thinking, there's that female like treatment, right? Like we don't even notice we're doing it. We treat women a certain way, and then we treat men a different way. And it kind of works in general interactions. Like I don't think it offends that many people, but in the workplace, I can sort of see how someone might feel like it's dehumanizing. But luckily, I don't work in the workplace right now, though I was actually offered a job yesterday, which I'll talk about another time. We're jumping over to Clubhouse, everybody. Let's go to Clubhouse. iPhone users, find Razi Ginsburg on there. He'll add you to the room. We're jumping over there right away, and we jump over to Clubhouse after every episode. And we even do it on Sundays, the weekly objective. So join us on Clubhouse. Thank you, Bonnie. Also, very pretty, that American dollar sign. I know all about that. We thank you for that. See, I'm very nice to women who give us money. Let's jump over to Clubhouse, and we'll be back here tomorrow as well for the daily objective. Thank you, Amanda and Mark, and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.